Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Today, I want to share a series put out by the Daily Wire because I think it highlights the road that our country is on. And it was written by Guy Van Fleet and Sasha Gong. Both of them together collaborated. And Guy is a survivor of Mao's Cultural Revolution. He's an activist, author of Mao's America, A Survivor's Warning. Sasha is a writer as well, scholar, journalist, and filmmaker. Descendant of Mao's China, she holds a PhD from Harvard University and was previously director of China branch at Voice of America. So they kind of know what they're talking about when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? And days after Zohn Mamdani won the Democratic primary of New York for New York City mayor, she said that I asked Guy Van Fleet, the activist and survivor of Mao's Cultural Revolution, to offer her thoughts on the socialist upstart. Quote, "The danger of communism is not that it comes all at once," Van Fleet wrote in July, "but that it creeps in gradually. I've seen where the road leads, and I'm here to say, don't go down it." Well, they said on September 10th, the world was shaken by the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA and a bright star of the conservative grassroots movement. Now, he was gunned down by a 22-year-old man while doing what he always did, engaging students in open debate on a college campus. An even darker reality followed. While legacy media outlets scrambled to whitewash the murder, social media platforms, especially TikTok, were flooded with posts openly celebrating this unspeakable act of political violence. How did we reach such a point where assassination is not only executed but openly applauded? And where did this path of legitimized violence take us next? Where will it take us next? We, too, immigrants from China, have seen this descent before. And tragically, we know all too well where it leads, they write. Well, in August 1966, in Mao's China, is forever remembered as Red August, also called the month of Red Terror. Less than 3 months into the Cultural Revolution, Mao's indoctrination, Red Guards, use ranging from college students to even elementary school children, unleashed a wave of political violence against class enemies, as they called them, in metropolitan Beijing. The Red Terror claimed more than 1,772 lives. Many victims were just randomly picked out by the mob. This was only the beginning. The violence soon swept across the nation, and by the end of the Cultural Revolution, as many as 20 million had perished. You may wonder how Mao turned children into killers overnight, but the truth is, he didn't. It took nearly 2 decades of relentless indoctrination in schools and universities, 17 years from the time the communists seized power in 1949, to mold a generation ready to carry out Mao's will. At the core of this indoctrination was a single lesson: to love the party with absolute devotion and to hate its class enemies with equal passion, even if those enemies were one's own parents. Showing loyalty was the only path to societal recognition and status evaluation. The more extreme, the better. Some in the West may remember Bo Exani, once a promising contender for the CCP's top job, until his rival, Xi Jinping, put him in prison for life. The son of Vice Premier Bo Zingani, became one of the earliest Red Guard organizers when he was only 17. After so many ordinary people were killed by the Red Guards, Mao turned against his political opponents. The truth target of the true target of the Cultural Revolution. Among them was Bo's father. To prove his loyalty, the son took part in the public humiliation and beating of his father, and reportedly broke 3 of his father's ribs. In America, the left has had even more time, far longer than Mao's 17 years, since taking control of the educational system and the media. Their relentless indoctrination and propaganda have now borne the bitter fruit they labored so hard to cultivate. Although America has not experienced anything on the scale of China's Cultural Revolution, the soil has been made disturbingly fertile for it. Both the CCP and America leftists use the same Marxist operating system, pitting the oppressors against the oppressed to divide people and define enemies. Simply by labeling their opponents Hitler, Nazi, fascist, KKK, all extremists on the left of the political spectrum, they are able to empower the indoctrinated army to take the step to eliminate their threat to their, or quote, our democracy. When a society accepts, justifies, and even cheers political violence, the license to kill has been granted. In just the past few years, we have witnessed the 2020 BLM and Antifa riots that burned cities and cost dozens of lives, assassination attempts on President Trump, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and escalating attacks on ICE. The survival of our republic and our civilization depend on us taking away the license to commit violence. Otherwise, we will descend into something akin to Mao's China. History is full of paradoxes. None is more striking than the revolutionary promise to rescue the downtrodden, only to end in destruction for all. From the French Revolution to Mao's Cultural Revolution, the pattern is familiar. Revolutionaries first evaluate the victims, granting them moral superiority. Those newly anointed victims are then encouraged to victimize their designated enemies. And what begins in the name of liberation almost always degenerates into tyranny. It is a story as old as revolution itself. The Jacobins invoked the poor and the persecuted when they set the guillotine to work on nobles and priests and eventually their own comrades. Lenin vowed to free workers and peasants from the czarist oppression, only to unleash the Red Terror that consumed millions, including many of his own followers. Mao empowered the youths to denounce their teachers and their parents and neighbors. In those frenzied years, almost everyone alternated between being a victim and being a victimizer, and frequently embodied both roles simultaneously. As George Danton himself, a leading figure of the French Revolution, devoured by the machine that he helped build, lamented, quote, "Revolution devours its own children," unquote. In China, we witnessed this cycle firsthand. The story of Bian Zarganian, there we go, the first teacher beaten to death by her students in August of 1966, illustrates it in all its cruelty. Bian had been a faithful revolutionary. She joined the Communist Party in 1941 and later helped carry out land reform in a village where she was involved in the stoning to death of 4 landlords, including a woman who once cared for her child. She was later rewarded with the post of principal at Beijing's most prestigious girls' high school, which primarily served the children of CCP elites. Yet her students, daughters of top party leaders, killed her within hours of the first frenzy of the Cultural Revolution. They were fueled by Mao's call to rebel. That month alone, thousands of teachers across China were killed. Millions more were publicly humiliated and beaten. What became of the new victimizers? After serving as Mao's instruments, the rebelling youths were discarded. The girls were sent into exile in China's remote regions for grueling labor. The cycle turned anew. The wheel of misfortune follows a grim logic. Authorities pick assumed victims and designate enemies. The chosen victims are given power beyond the law, while enemies are stripped of any protection. Victimhood becomes not a misfortune, but a privilege. People scramble to claim it, often by victimizing others. The scope of enemies then expands endlessly. Eventually, the beast devours everything. We would be foolish to believe this tragic dynamic cannot repeat here. In recent years, America has seen smaller but chilling echoes. The hashtag #MeToo movement, Black Lives Matter, pro-Hamas, anti-ICE protests, and so on. Who are the victims? Those once deemed victimizers: men, white people, and law enforcement personnel. Though our democracy tempers the scale, the revolutionary zeal is real and has already produced a vast number of victims. Virginia gubernatorial candidate Abigail Spanberger recently exhorted her supporters, quote, "Let your rage fuel you," unquote. Rage justifies escalation. Exaggerated allegations, destruction of reputations, looting, even violence. We saw the consequences in the murder of Charlie Kirk. The other fuel is thrill. Lenin once called revolution the festival of the masses. It is intoxicating to watch hierarchies topple, reputations destroyed, enemies dragged into public square. Today, whole groups are urged to define themselves by grievances, while the list of oppressors grows without limit. Yesterday's allies become today's enemies. Yesterday's victim becomes today's victimizer. Unfortunately, a society built on grievous politics collapses under its own contradictions. China paid dearly. Mao's Cultural Revolution killed tens of millions of people, including revolutionaries themselves, and brought the country to its knees. In America, leftist ideology has condemned inner city communities to drugs and crime and welfare dependency that deepens poverty rather than relieves it. The paradox endures. Revolutions that begin in the name of justice often end in greater injustice. Movements that elevate victims often produce mass victimization. Ideologies that promise to heal history's wounds often end up deepening its scars. The lesson is clear. A healthy society must organize suffering without weaponizing it, redress injustice without creating new ones, and honor dignity rather than grievance. If we fail, the cycle will repeat, as it has so many times before. And once again, revolution will devour everyone, including those who started the revolution. The story of women under radical Marxist ideology is the story of beauty turned to beast. Mao Zedong's wife, Jing Qing, known in the West as Madame Mao, was once celebrated as a symbol of feminine beauty. In the 1930s, Shanghai, the so-called Hollywood of the East, she gained fame as a rising movie star, embodying the glamour and grace traditionally associated with Chinese womanhood. But Shanghai was also a hub of progressives, communist sympathizers, and fellow travelers, and Zheng Qing was soon drawn into their orbit. In 1937, at the age of 23, Qing, like tens of thousands of other progressive youths, traveled to Yan'an, the communist stronghold in the Loess Hills of northwestern China, to join the revolution, where she quickly caught Mao Zedong attention and leading him to set aside his guerrilla fighter wife and marry the former movie star. As Qing bound herself to Mao and the communist revolution, she began to shed her feminine image, cutting her long hair short, trading dresses for shapeless military uniforms, and abandoning the aura of a glamorous actress. This transformation was not simply personal. It reflected a broader ideological demand. In Yan'an and later in Beijing, the revolution required individuals to dissolve their identity into the collective. As Mao's political power grew, Zheng's own image moved ever further from the ideals of Chinese traditional femininity. In 1966, when Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, her metamorphosis was complete. Um, evaluated to unprecedented authority as Chairman Mao's greatest standard bearer, she emerged as a hardened, gender-neutral revolutionary warrior wearing a distinctly masculine haircut and clad only in Mao suit or military uniform. Qing became the model for all Chinese women to emulate. Feminine qualities were denounced as toxic, and reductionary, and women were expected to abandon not only the ornaments of beauty, but the very essence of femininity itself, as lovers, wives, and mothers. Mao himself praised this new ideal in verse when he said, quote, China's daughters hold uncommon resolve. They love not spending ornaments, but the arms of revolution, unquote. Now, nowhere was this more stark than in the Red Guard movement. Thousands of teenage girls who might once have sung, studied, or courted love, well, they instead shouted slogans, wielded clubs, and became torturers and killers. The Red Guard was responsible for the first murder of the Cultural Revolution, the brutal beating to death of their principal at the Beijing Girls' High School, an act that unleashed the nationwide violence which would claim tens of millions of lives. It was, in fact, it was in that era that both of us, as they wrote here, passed through girlhood, adolescence, and the bloom of youth, devoid of all femininity. We were told, and we believed, that women could hold up half the sky, and that whatever men could do, we could do better. We strove to become iron girls, the Chinese version of the superwoman, taking on the hardest tasks while training ourselves to look, speak, and act like men. Family, children, and motherhood were pushed from our minds. All that mattered was proving ourselves as revolutionaries. Sadly, that the Defeminization left deep scars on the women of our generation, eroding many of the traditional Chinese virtues of womanhood: tenderness, modesty, nurturing, grace, and devotion to family. Our generation, unlike our Western counterparts, grew up without dreams of a fairy tale love story or a perfect wedding. When some of us later came to the West, we shattered the stereotype of what an Asian woman was expected to be in the eyes of the Westerners. As survivors of Mao's defamation, we are horrified to see history repeating itself here in America. Although the process began decades ago with the rise of second wave feminism in the 1960s, its pace has accelerated dramatically in recent years. Radicalized young women, especially white female youth in search of identity, have taken the defeminization to new extremes. The body itself becomes a canvas of protest against uh, convention and traditional feminine beauty, blue hair, tattoos, piercings, harsh attire, announce open rebellion. One needs to look no further than the Antifa girls on the streets for living proof. As in Mao's China, defeminization is more than outward transformation. In today's woke culture, it is a proud declaration of being the opposite of what family, culture, and faith once revered as good and beautiful or sacred. In this sense, it is a total reordering of values, inscripted visibility on the body. What is even worse is that defeminization of women is accompanied by the feminization of men. A topic for another time, of course, but both trends aim to shake the very foundation of a functioning society. And after the 2024 election, Democrats convinced themselves that their problem was not their embrace of divisive radical ideology or failed policies, but poor communication with the people, particularly working class voters. Their conclusion was simple: Donald Trump had won over working class and minority men through vulgarity. If Trump could toss out blunt, unpolished lines, then they believed they could surpass him and regain an electoral edge by lacing their speeches with profanity. Their experiment over the past few months has been awkward at best. Many Democrats now spit out curse words with visible discomfort, as if swearing were a foreign tongue. With the exception of lawmakers like Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a lawyer who seamlessly flits between courtroom diction and a less polished vernacular, most Democrats can't pull this off. Audiences have noticed the fakery and have been quick to mock the lawmakers and their newfound edge. But something more sinister is afoot with the Democrats' sudden embrace of profanity. In Mao's China, where both of us grew up, they write, the first casualty of the Cultural Revolution was not lives, but language. For millennia, Chinese tradition prized harmony, and criticism was expressed through subtly suggestion and indirection. And then Mao launched the Cultural Revolution with a sort of essay in the People's Daily, in which he branded his opponents poisonous. Quote, they have puffed up the arrogance of the bourgeoisie and deflated the moral of the proletariat. Mao, this is what Mao wrote. He says, how poisonous. He demanded their purge, hinting even at their physical destruction. Red Guards intoxicated with revolutionary zeal, followed his lead. And to prove their proletarian authority and authenticity, they laced every sentence with the Chinese equivalent of the F word, reducing a once elevated language to a blunt weapon of class struggle. Crudeness soon became a prerequisite for joining the Red Guards, while proper speech was denounced as bourgeoisie and unworthy of the revolution. Almost overnight, vulgarity filled big character posters, leaflets, even newspapers and magazines. The belief was simple. The cruder the words, the closer one stood to the chosen people of the revolution: workers, peasants, and soldiers. Obscenity fueled seamlessly with violence. Students became mobs, hurling profanities as they smashed classrooms and beat teachers and just put on display class enemies through and threw them in the streets. Language collapsed into humiliation, torture, and public killing. For 10 years, Mao's China lived under obscenity and terror. A generation had its soul poisoned. A civilization's fabric was shredded. The revolutionary tradition carries on in China today. More than once, the current Communist Party chairman, Xi Jinping, has warned that China's enemies will be reduced to fen shen suigu, literally a body ground into powder and bones smashed into pieces. If you wonder why Xing speaks with such brutal bluntness and violent vocabulary, the roots lie with Mao. The Chinese communists believe that vulgar language could rally the masses into revolutionary action. In practice, it mobilized the worst elements of society. The tragedy was that it never reflected the authentic voice of the working class. Real working people in China, though they may not speak the king's Chinese, cherished the hope that their children would. They understood that education and refinement elevated one's status. Coarse language, by contrast, changed people and chained them to the bottom, as George Bernard Shaw shows in the Pillion, later adapted into the hit musical My Fair Lady. Speech is the passport to opportunity. Like Mao, Democrats operate on the same false assumption about their base. Instead of lifting the working class, they trap voters in a linguistic and cultural ghetto, telling themselves that this is what the people want and deserve, all while pretending to champion them. By forcing obscenities into their speech, Democratic leaders sound neither authentic nor loyal. They sound desperate. They have also badly misread Trump. Pseudo-intellectuals assumed that president's appeal lay in coarseness. In reality, it lay in candor. Trump does not speak from consultant-written scripts. He speaks with raw, sometimes jarring honesty that working people recognize. He stands with the average Joe because culturally he's one of them, not by wealth or pedigree, but by instinct. He talks about jobs, factories, borders, and national pride. He despises management jargon and academic emphasis. His voters love him not for his rough edges, but for his faithfulness to what they live and feel. Democrats may try to intimidate populists, but until they truly understand them, they cannot be believed. Language can heal, elevate, and liberate, or it can poison, debase, and destroy. In their anti-Trump frenzy, Democrats have humiliated themselves, degraded voters, and poisoned the young. They must stop or be stopped. Every nation lives by its landmarks. These are not merely dates on a calendar, but signposts dividing history into before and after. They anchor collective memory and shape how people understand themselves. For Americans, the great landmarks have long been clear. 1492, the discovery of the New World; 1776, independence; 1861, the Civil War; 1929, the Great Depression; 1964, the Civil Rights Act. To speak of before and after these events is to tell the story of a nation striving toward freedom and law and self-government. In recent years, however, new landmarks have been imposed by ideological fiat. The most striking is the New York Times 1619 Project, which declared that America began not in 1776, but in the year enslaved Africans first arrived in Virginia. With that shift, the axis of history moved. Before and after independence became before and after slavery. Liberty and law were redefined as hypocrisy and oppression. More dividing lines quickly followed, before and after Jim Crow, before and after George Floyd, and so on. These changes are not merely academic, but when Chinese Communist Party seized power in 1949, it imposed a single ultimate landmark, before liberation and after liberation. 5,000 years of recorded history were collapsed into a morality tale. Everything before was painted as darkness, everything after as light. The word liberation itself became a judgment on every person and institution. Those who had prospered before were condemned, often destroyed. The CCP has never ceased wielding this powerful weapon to manufacture historic milestones. And after the disastrous Mao era, it crafted yet another milestone by dividing its own history into before reform and opening up and after. The Mao years were rebranded as decades of exploration, arduous exploration, in search of a better China, erasing the atrocities that claimed tens of millions of lives. The post-Mao period, by contrast, is exactly as the party's crowning achievement, lifting the Chinese people out of poverty and transforming China into an economic superpower. And the ultimate aim? Well, to enshrine the CCP as the eternal liberator of the Chinese people. This is not just propaganda, but a wholesale transformation of society. History was rewritten, and language reshaped, and culture remade. The before was demonized, the after glorified. Ordinary people adopted the new vocabulary willingly or not, and once language changed, thought and memory changed too. The Chinese people, once bound by a magnificent civilization, was divided into good and bad classes, oppressors and oppressed, loyalists and enemies. Hatred of the designated groups was not just tolerated, but demanded. America was not a one-party state. Our institutions remained democratic. Yet the project of reframing what might be called cultural Marxism has advanced here with surprising speed. The narrative of American exceptionalism, rooted in liberty, law, and individualism, has been replaced by a narrative of slavery, racism, and oppression. The left has shown itself to be even more cunning cultural Marxists than the Maoists. They have redefined and simplified American history into a new binary, before and after. In their telling, the before is our present, defined solely as slavery and white oppression, rendering the Civil War irrelevant and erasing the achievements of countless Black Americans, including Barack Obama. The after, meanwhile, exists only in the future, And how is that future to be reached? By demanding the entire system, which they insist is built on racism and bigotry and injustice. History's landmarks are never neutral. They can unite or divide, elevate or diminish. To say before independence and after independence is to conceive of ourselves as citizens, free, equal, and striving for self-rule. And to say before slavery and after slavery is to fix identity forever in terms of bondage and resentment. One story moves toward freedom, and the other freezes us in grievance. Nations cannot thrive on grievance. A shared history, however imperfect, is the glue that binds generations. To rewrite that history into a tale of villains and victims is to dissolve the glue. The real question is whether we will continue to allow landmarks to redefine us. Will we pass onto our own children the story of a free people equal under God, struggling but advancing toward justice? Or will we hand them a fractured narrative that teaches them to see one another as permanent enemies? History is never only about the past. It frames the future. What we choose as our before and after will decide who we become. I wanted to share that with you, and I know we're going just a little bit late today, but I wanted to share that with you because I felt it was so good to see from the eyes of people who have seen this road before what they see the road that we are on now. I would love to hear what you have to say on it. And of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening. This podcast is a production of Organite Communications.